It's been a while since we read out of the Dictionary Smoky Mountain English, so we're going to do that today. We're going to focus on words and phrases that start with the letter Q. So the very first entry is Quaker lady, Quaker maid, Quaking lady, and that's a noun. It's the bluet, the little blue flower. 1901, Lunsberry, Southern Wildflowers, bluets, innocents, Quaker ladies, or bonnets. The flower grows erect, often many of the plants producing through moist, grassy places a most enchanting stretch of ethereal blue. 1970, Campbell, Smoky Mountain Wildflowers. Other common names for the prostrate bluet are innocents and Quaker maids. That's interesting. I've never heard that little flower called that, but hopefully next time I see it, I'll think of that, Quaker lady. The next entry is quarrel at, a verb phrase, to scold. 1959, Wheels, Hillbilly Dictionary, means to scold. Mama quarreled at me for not eating my breakfast. 1973, Great Smoky Mountain National Park. I remember Eder quarreling at you and Ray, you know, for running through the house and making such a fuss. 1994, Montgomery Collection. She quarreled at her husband so much that he left her. That was Cardwell. So that was a quarreling woman. That's one that I grew up hearing. Granny and Pap would both use that. They might tell me and Paul, quit quarreling, like if we were fussing at each other, you know how kids do. Granny might say somebody was, maybe talking about somebody that had got on to her or something, saying she was just quarreling at me. So that's the one I grew up with. I'll be interested to see if you did. Quarrel at. Here's one, quarter. 1/4 of a mile. 1939 Hall Collection, Deep Creek, North Carolina. So the dogs took after the bear and he went out, I judge, about a quarter. So they're just using quarter instead of saying quarter mile. I've never heard anyone say that one. Quartering, adverb, diagonally. 1862, Gatlin, Immortal Hero. I did not, however, put the pistol against him, but I put it very near him, and I shot him in the right breast as he was in a position quartering to me. Wow, that's some serious stuff happening there. 1974, Finks, Bits of Mountain Speech. He walked quartering across the field. So that's how I've heard that one used most often. Matt might be talking about a deer or a rabbit or something like that he harvested, or a turkey or something, and he might say, it come quartering towards me, from the left or whatever, something like that. So I have heard that one used fairly often. The next one is quarterly meeting. And this is one that seems to me like this one would be very common everywhere, just that quarterly meeting, if you have a meeting every quarter. A denominational gathering held every 3 months, most often by Methodists, of pastors and congregational delegates to conduct church business and hear one or more guest preachers. 1973, Great Smoky Mountain National Park. And the biggest day that we've had here then was the quarterly meeting. 1982, Powers and Hannah, Cataloochee. Originally begun with another purpose in mind as a religious event, the quarterly meeting seems to live in the minds of its participants as the big picnic, enlivened by rousing rhetoric from visiting preachers. So I guess I'm thinking about a quarterly meeting. Maybe you'd have it at the bank has it, or wherever you work, your place of business. But they're specifically talking about a church having it. So that's interesting, a quarterly meeting. I don't know of any churches in my area that have anything like that. And then sounds like they talked about business, but they also then would have the visiting preachers. So that's an interesting one. The next one is quarter time. The holding of preaching services once a month, often on both Saturday and Sunday. A schedule followed by smaller congregations that did not have a preacher of their own and whose members often had great distances to travel. The church would often be served by a circuit rider. So I've heard of circuit riders and visiting preachers, all those kind of things where church isn't fortunate enough to have a full-time pastor, and then maybe one just comes through ever so often and visits with them. But I've not heard of that quarter time. That's interesting. The next one is Queen of the Meadow, is a noun, a perennial plant. having medicinal properties, same as Joe Pye weed. So I have Queen of the Meadows. They grow everywhere in my area of Appalachia, up and down the roadways, all the way around my house. 1937, Thornboro, Great Smoky Mountain. In late summer or early fall, one sees the tall growing flowers such as the purple ironweed and lavender Joe Pye weed or Queen of the Meadow. 1980, Smoky's Heritage, blooming with pink or purple flowers from July through late September. Queen of the Meadow is today known, less romantically of course, as Joe Pye weed. It is a flower of moist soils and mountain fields, occurring up to 3,000 feet elevation and towering over the rest of the wildflowers. Its height may reach from 12 to 15 feet. And then 1982, a more fitting name, Queen of the Meadow, is applied to Joe Pye weed in the southern mountains. I always do think of it like they remind me, I can see Queen of the Meadow because they're tall. They are so tall, the ones around my house. Sometimes they'll get so tall they kind of bend over, they fall over, or they nod over. They just kind of halfway fall over. But I've always thought they kind of look like a Queen of the Meadow, like they're haughty and high-minded, we would say. But they don't realize they're just all around them are people just like them. There's queens just like them. I don't know why that's always come to my mind when I would see them and why I would think about that. But it's like they're, you think you're a queen, but you're surrounded by queens. So you're really not all that. You're not, it's like they're being high-minded or being bigoted or whatever, and they're only a plant. But that's what comes to my mind. The next one is just the word queer, but here you'll hear it choir, somebody's choir. And it says a variant form, choir. The latter is more common. 1913, Capard, our Southern Highlanders, foreigner, outlander, it is all one, we are different, we are choir, to the mountaineer. 1933, Carpenter, variation in dialect, choir for queer seems pretty well confined to the Kentucky and Tennessee mountain sections. So I would disagree with that one because it's very common in the North Carolina part where I live too, and even all of western North Carolina I would go so far as to say. 1940, Hans Hawks Dunn, he got just plumb choir looking. 1979, Carpenter Walton War, I reckon I'm choir. Some folks I like and others I mislike, and I can't help it. So most of the time it just means somebody, I would say, in my experience with the word, it's just somebody that acts strange. Maybe somebody that's, somebody might even think that I'm choir because maybe I don't like to go to town as much as other people. I don't like to shop. I don't like those kind of things. But it can also be used to mean somebody that's kind of just a little bit off mentally. Maybe something, maybe they have a mental handicap, or maybe they're just, they're not thinking straight, or maybe they've done, been drinking or something like that, and they're just acting strange. But we would say they're just acting choir. But typically it would just be to describe somebody who's just different, who's just, we've all come across characters like that in our lives. It doesn't mean they're bad, it just means that they're not the average person. In lots of ways, they're probably ahead. I mean, it's probably nice to be unique in some way like that. But that's what it means in my experience. Let's see what else we got. Here's, yes, Uncle Zeb was a plumb choir man, but how he could make a fiddle play. And then here's one talking about like kind of the mental part I was talking about. 1939 Hall Collection, Gatlinburg, Tennessee. She's choir now and don't have good recollections. So she had left or was losing her memory, maybe had a little bit of dementia. Even goes on to say, Burns, our Southern Mountaineers, the mountaineer believes that the animal is bewitched, especially if a cow that gives choir milk or the butter won't come. So even saying the cow, something's wrong with it, it's giving choir milk. So that one's a choir is a pretty common one here where I'm at. And then kind of also going right with that, so then if you have somebody that's choir, like the man that could play the fiddle but he was strange somehow, you could also say they're choir turned. That turned part is used often, I mean, in lots of different ways. Maybe they're hateful turned, maybe they're good turned. bad turned. You hear that, and that's talking about somebody's actual personality. So if somebody's got a bad turn to them, then that just means they're not really nice. Or got a real good turn, it means they're just nice and pleasant. So in other words, you could be choir, and then if you were choir, somebody might say you were choir turned. This next one is interesting. It's a quern. I've never heard nobody use this word, but it was used often in the book Alex Stewart that we read. So it's a primitive mill for grinding grain consisting of 2 circular stones. The upper one is turned by hand. I said it was used often. I just mean it was used in that book. I don't guess it was used often. Anyway, 1913, Cape Art, our Southern Highlanders. In some places today, we still find the ancient quern or hand mill jocularly called an Armstrong machine. 1950, Wilburn, quern. Another photograph in our series shows a Kentucky mountaineer grinding corn with a quern or hand mill such as was used in ancient Britain. The nether stone is set in a hollow log similar to a bee gum. The upper one has a hole through the center where the grain is fed by hand and is turned round and round by a driving stick, the upper end of which is held in position by a right-angled arm. It cannot be said that querns were in actual use in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park in 1926 through 1930. However, several of the old settlers were familiar with them and had seen them in use in earlier times. While exploring in a very secluded and almost inaccessible area some 6 miles down the Tuckasegee River from Bryson City, there was found a pair of very crude quern stones. It was well known in local tradition that a number of Cherokee Indian families had hid out in this area during the removal period in 1838, and following that, they eked out a most perilous existence for several months in the period in which others were being hunted by United States soldiers. The stones, querns, in question were collected for possible museum display. Only one family lived in the area at the time. The name has been forgotten, but it is in the museum records. The man had a good many years previously used the querns as capstones on high wooden pillows under his barn. I helped him prise up the barn and replace the querns with other stones. As previously stated, these were the crudest sort of querns. There was no sign of furrowing. The working faces were smooth and showed signs of abrasion by much use. They were about 16 inches in diameter, 3 inches thick, roughly circular in shape, only the angular corners having been pecked off with a hammer or most likely with another stone. Fascinating. Fascinating. I would love to see them. And just so that you can know how it's spelled, is Quern, quern. So fascinating that they were able to get those two that they, believe probably were the Cherokees, and that the man was using them. Again, people really make do with whatever they have, especially in those days. So he'd found them and decided they'd be good to help hold up his barn. So that's neat. That's good, and I'm glad that they were able to get them back and to preserve them for other people to see. It makes me wonder if they're in the Cherokee Museum. That's a fantastic place if you've ever been there, or if you've never been, you should go if you're ever in the area. It's fascinating, really well done. Or if they were put in a different museum. The Cherokee County Museum in my county has a lot of Indian artifacts in it. It's a really interesting place to visit too. Here's another one, quick or quicken, to prick the hoof of a horse in improper shoeing, thereby crippling the animal. That'd be terrible. You wouldn't want to do that. The nails in his feet quickened the horse. The nails in his feet quicked the horse. That one was the quicked instead of the quicken. Then here's 1939. You quicken the heel when you stick a tack in it. 1997 Montgomery collection, quick, to pare the hoof to the quick or drive a nail into the hoof, and that was known by Jones. Done by inept shoeing, so somebody that didn't know how to shoe a horse exactly right. This one, again, it seems strange that it's listed in the dictionary, but it's just quieten down, to become quiet. The next one, a quietus, I grew up with that one. Pap used that one. I remember him telling us that, but also Corey and Katie and April, he'd tell them he's going to put a quietus on them. And when they'd get silly, they'd be out at Granny and Pap's and they'd get silly. And what a quietus is a noun, a hush, a state of calm or quiet, as in the early morning or after a rain, something that brings calm or death or that causes action to cease, especially in phrases put a quietus on or put the quietus on. 1931, Professor learns, of course, he says, reckon and write smart, and you all, and quietus and pisen and yon side. So they were just talking about somebody that said all those words. 1939, WPA Guide, North Carolina, the calm that comes to some living thing after death, used in pity by an old woman about a wild animal killed by the dogs. 1998 Montgomery Collection, Jim put the quietus on that loud mouth. He put a quietus on the congregation when he come in. You kids better quieten down or I'll put a quietus on you. He sure put the quietus on him in a hurry. A calmness with no time restrictions and not always associated with rain. I know the term in expressions such as, although the boys had been arguing all day, their father put a quietus on them when he came home from work. So all those putting a quietus on the kids or the man, all those things, that'd be the way that I've heard it used most often. Let's see. Quilting bee, that one's very common, of course, in lots of places, not just in Appalachia. Quilting party, noun, a gathering of women to help a neighbor make quilts and to socialize, often in conjunction with a working of some type. So let's see, we'll go all the way. Let's go to 1975, Lunsford it used to be. Now people going to marry or have married and need to have a few more quilts and things of that kind, while they'll make up a lot of quilt tops and give a quilting. Of course, that's a lot of fun, and often they give a quilting at the same time they have a log rolling or something of that kind, a working, a house raising. The quilting party was a party in which the people of the house would have laid aside their quilt scraps, that is, various scraps of cloth that from time to time had been left over from making dresses of various kinds. Sometimes they were pretty costly dresses, still that would go into a quilt. And then the children's dresses of the calicos and the ginghams and things of that kind would be saved. The older and more inactive women of the household would take time out to sew those scraps together, first with the fingers and then after a while with the sewing machine, until they'd made a quilt top. When one was finished, they'd begin another. They would make these quilt pieces or quilt squares into certain patterns, and it is a science in itself. When they get ready to make the quilts, they get the wool or the batting, the cotton batting or whatever it was, and have all that ready. If they didn't have the quilting frames, they go and borrow them. So it goes on from there. Really interesting. Granny has quilting frames, and she got Pap. She don't quilt as much these days, but she used to. And she didn't really do like the fancy, all the different patterns. Hers were more the utilitarian kind that you just needed to cover up with to stay warm. But they were pretty, really pretty. But she would get she got Pap to hang them in the basement, and you could lower them down and then put them back up. I think a lot of people store them like that, whether it's upstairs in their main living area or in a basement or somewhere like that, where that they can be put up out of the way, because of course if you were walking around they'd be in your way. But that one's interesting. Quiltnest. If you're somebody that does like to quilt, you might be the quiltnest. You know, Granny wasn't really the quiltness woman I know, but I do know, I have a friend who's the quiltness woman I know. She loves to quilt and has been quilting for years and years and years. We like to put that EST on words in Appalachia, so you might be the fightingest man, the singingest person, just to put that EST on whatever it is, the swimmingest, I mean anything you can think of, the dancingest, the fiddlingest. Just to really put emphasis on that we want you to know that they really were crazy about doing whatever it was, whether it was quilting or fiddling or fighting or whatever. Quit. To leave, abandon, depart from. 1939 Hall Collection, Deep Creek, North Carolina. Well, he quit me there, and he said he was a-going to camp. That was Mark Cathy. Deep Creek, North Carolina. That bull was so dangerous, everybody had to quit the mountain. And then it's the second entry kind of for that is that is to use as a verb phrase that it won't quit, to describe something excellent or superlative. 1956 Hall Collection, Hurricane Creek, North Carolina. I've got some apples that won't quit. So I guess that their trees were producing so much, it was just unbelievable how many they had. That was Molly McMahon. Molly McMahon. Quit out, to stop, cease. I had to quit out and go to school. That one, the use of quit there, that's really common in my area. You know, you might be, talking about somebody that was on the ball team or something like that. Or maybe they were just part of a group, some kind of like, can't really think of nothing off the top of my head. But say it was a ball team, and then you notice somebody wasn't on it, and you might say, well, what happened to him? Well, they got mad and he quit them. He ain't part of them no more. He quit them. So that was kind of like the one, he quit me there, and he was going to camp. Everybody had to quit the mountain. So that one, again, that one seems like it would be common in lots of other places like that. I might say, I was working out in the garden and Katie quit me. She got mad at me and said I was working her too hard and went to the house. So that it just seems like that one would be common in lots of areas, not just here in Appalachia, but you'll have to tell me if it's common where you live. So I hope you enjoyed this little thing. I guess I could use quit and say the second one, I've got some thoughts about Appalachian language and it just won't quit. My thoughts just won't quit. So I'm going to keep sharing them, and I hope that you enjoy me sharing them. Please leave a comment though and tell me which of these words and phrases that you're familiar with, that are common in your area, and then also which ones maybe you're not familiar with, maybe you've never heard before. As always, I hope you'll keep dropping back by often, help me celebrate Appalachia. And one of my favorite things to talk about is the wonderful, colorful, rich language of Appalachia.